excited because we have such a special guest on today, and I just look forward to hearing more about her. We booked her a couple of probably months ago, and so she's here. But before we talk about that, we want to thank y'all for supporting us over the last 2 years and some change, probably over 2 years. We want to thank y'all for continuing to support what we're doing here on the Black Podcast, but also supporting our company HSBA, where you can look on our website at wearehsba.com and learn more about what we're doing and how we've expanded on the Black Podcast. And everyone here is important. So please make sure you do your part with sharing these videos. You never know who we may have on that can change your life or change your story or somebody in your circle. So please never think that, okay, this story doesn't match mine and I don't really need this, but you never know who's in your circle that may need to hear it. So you can contribute and help and support the Black Podcast by sharing this show that we're going to have on here today.
Yeah, what she said. So, I mean, I can sit here all day and talk about myself because I'm proud of where I came from and some of the things that I have accomplished and some of the lives that I have touched along the journey. But there's only so much that I can do by myself. So, I'm thankful that I was able to partner up with Dr. Hobson because there's certain corners that I wouldn't be able to reach without her, and certain corners she wouldn't be able to reach without me. So just as you hear the cliche, it takes a village to raise a kid. Well, it takes a community of us to really be able to raise that next generation to be what they can be. And that's one of the reasons why we created the Black Podcast, so that we can continue to grow that community. And we have with us today someone that is pretty much part of the same mission, working to help transform the lives of the next generation, make sure that they have things available to them and opportunities available to them that maybe we didn't have. So I'm not going to sit here and speak too much more on it, but we're going to go ahead and bring our guest to the forefront. Drum roll, please. Dr. Katina Thomas, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well. How are you guys today?
We are
Doing
blessed.
great. Doing great. So we know that you're a busy woman. And so we appreciate you taking the time to be on the Black Podcast. And we want to make sure that we respect your time. So we're going to dive right in. We know that behind every glory is a story. And so we want to know your background or where you're from and the dynamics of your family, how you grew up.
Okay. My journey started in the great city of Port Arthur, Texas, which is out of the Golden Triangle, which is Southeast Texas. And I came from a home with two parents. I nicknamed myself, or I was nicknamed this, a Prairie View baby, because my parents met in college at Prairie View A&M University. And so they're college sweethearts. And they married and they started having children. They built their family. And I am the middle child, the only girl. So I come from a house that was male dominated, but I was still nurtured and loved and cared for like the baby girl that I was. As soon as I graduated high school, after being active in the community growing up, by my parents being college educated, I actually had a middle class upbringing, which is actually not an anomaly in the Black community. So I appreciate this platform to talk about my background, that all of us don't come from homes that fall into labels or statistics. So I came from a two-parent household. I have two brothers. My older brother went off to college. He went off to Prairie View, has his degree. I came behind him. And when I got to college, undergrad, and I made the decision to go to an HBCU, it was because growing up, we were very immersed in the Black community in Port Arthur. We were active in civic and social organizations. My father is in a fraternity. He's an Omega Psi Phi. So whatever community activities they had, we were active. I have aunts that are members of Delta Sigma Theta. So whatever community activities they had, uh, I was active in as well. I grew up in a Black church. I was nurtured with all of those elements of the Black community that are still around. So that, and I want everyone to know that our population exists, that we shouldn't be overlooked because we don't have a rags to riches story. So I went away to college. I went for undergraduate at Prairie View A&M. I was there on full scholarship. And it used to be a time when I would be afraid to tell people these things because they weren't being glorified. But I feel as though now people need to know that there are successful Black kids. There were high achieving Black kids that were comfortable in their skin. So I went to Prairie View, received my undergraduate degree in education, and then I started teaching. And I relocated to Houston and was teaching in A-Leaf Independent School District, which was very diverse. And I wound up going there with a lot of my friends from college. So I had a little bit of a network and support system, even though we were all at different campuses. While there, where I was learning about more diverse cultures and outside of my bubble, I started graduate school and I entered the University of Houston to earn my Master's of Education Administration because my thought process was okay, I'm goal driven. I know exactly what I want to do. I want to teach for a few years and I want to be an administrator. Even at 17 years old, I was saying, I'm going to be a superintendent of schools. I was going to run everything. I started that journey and I kept getting doors shut. I would keep interviewing across different districts, but I started to feel the effects of a glass ceiling, being a Black female that was professional. And in education, what I started to notice as I looked around is that there were other women with my background that were professional educators that were teaching for very many years, were very successful with children of all backgrounds, had the education and the credentials, and weren't getting promoted. And it started to get to be frustrating, especially for someone with my background where it seems like everything I set out to do, I was able to accomplish. So as I continued teaching and working, I started to also now, my focus started to change. My vision started to change with how I viewed education. And I started to notice that in education, our kids, meaning Black kids, were not getting the same equitable opportunities that other kids were getting, just as a lot of the Black educators weren't. So were the Black students. And I started to notice that the reason I was starting to struggle and not get promoted was because I was always thinking about what's going to happen, trying to be proactive. And I ran into a lot of instances where they wanted you to be reactive to something as opposed to being able to foresee something coming and preventing it. So that led me to graduate school a second time to get my doctorate. And I started that program the same month I was about to take my real estate license and leave education altogether. So the day before the real estate exam, I received my admissions letter into the doctoral program. And I said, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. So I went back to University of Houston, had a wonderful mentor, wonderful dissertation chair who looked like me and understood what I was trying to do with my research. And once I received my doctorate, that's when I started to ease into higher education because my doctoral mentor told me, don't go back to K-12. It's not for you. She could read me like a book because it wasn't helping me grow in that season of life. It grew me, but it could only grow me so far. So she said, don't go back. So I started into higher education and I fell in love with it. I found my spark back for teaching, coaching, mentoring, and I received an offer for my first tenure track position at a PWI, predominantly white institution. I didn't think much of it, hadn't had any issues, but while there, it seems like everything that I wanted to do that was centered on us or targeted us as far as research or ideas, the answer was always no. It's always no. So after 3 years with them, I finally found a way to get back to an HBCU. So after 18 months of trying to work at it, an opening came up at Prairie View A&M, back at my alma mater. So I had the opportunity to go home, or what I call home, where I was first fed and nurtured professionally. And now I'm back there helping students in the same department where I received my first degree. So every time I look at them, I see myself. Um, I also think about uh, when I look at the students, the directions they can go and what relationships and what type of education do they need when they come to my courses or they work with me in programs that I'm doing on campus that can prepare them to avoid any pitfalls that I may have encountered in education, and also what opportunities are there and available for them regardless of where their journey started. So that's where I am now.
Wow, wow. We have similar stories. Of course, I'm a Delta, so I know your mom was straight, and then your dad. We just got this whole thing
And
going on.
of course, Sarah, of course.
So I remember that journey as well. I was always been in athletics. And so I grew up running track, and I knew I wanted to be this Olympic track coach, and I wanted to, and then my passion started to become like, okay, I want to do more. I want to be in spaces where I can call some shots and make some decisions and implement some change. And so I remember in college, you didn't hear about women becoming athletic directors. You heard like sports medicine. If you wanted to be in sports, it was sports medicine, physical therapy, a lawyer, or a nurse. Those are like your common, majors or degrees or paths that you could take. And so going through the system, becoming a teacher, like you were saying, and still coaching, I realized that I wanted to be an athletic director. So I went and got all these certifications and went to go get a doctorate in sports administration. I'm checking all these boxes, and I go in the interview and they're like, no. And like you said, just every door, I mean, just closing on me. And I'm like, I got the experience, I got the results, I got the this, I got the that. And it's like, no, no, no. And there was times I didn't even get interviews at all. And then when I finally got into that space where I'm like, okay, now I'm in a leadership role as an athletic coordinator. Now I get to help make some change. Now I get to help change, the perspective of athletes and their journeys. And then I still gotta know, I still was getting the, you're a woman, you're beautiful. Just sit there and be cute. Not worrying about the education, not worrying about, and the more I disrupted the system, the more I challenged the system, the further I was getting away from number one, being promoted, and two, being renewed. And so it is a real journey. It's a real journey that we go on because we're taught, well, if you go get your education, you check these boxes, that these doors would start to open for you. And I felt like I had more doors closed the more education I got. And I was like, this is crazy. And so, we talk about the challenges that you had as an educator, but on top of being an educator and now athletics, it's like, why can't you just coach? You're really good at that. It's like, well, why can't I be in the office where you're at? I'm really good at that too. I'm good at leading more than I'm probably good at coaching. And so we have those glass ceilings that we're constantly fighting on a daily basis. And when you grew up like you did with your mother and father, where there was structure, a lot of times people wanted to know your story. And if your story didn't come with the rags to riches, you felt like you weren't relevant. You felt like, well, maybe I need to create something where somebody can be impressed and say, wow, you've done all those things. And so I think that I know for myself, I struggled a lot and I dealt with a lot of depression that I didn't know that I actually had, right? So I want you to speak on just going through this journey, knowing these changes and what you have to offer and still getting these no's. Talk about that for us a little bit more.
Okay, I share the part of your story where I did have to face the depression. I had to realize it was there because in our community we're just told, well, it just wasn't for you, or keep praying about it and just keep moving. And when you feel as though you're continuously successful and you have the support system that's always cheering you on or coaching you on and saying to keep going and pushing you, they're nudging you with love, and then you feel as though you can't move any further, like nothing's working for you, you become your own worst critic. You beat yourself up the most. If I hadn't had that experience, then I wouldn't be able to turn around and walk into my classrooms where I am today, where I at times have had female students beat themselves up, or just students in general beat themselves up because they feel as though they fell short. And the first thing I do is I pull from those various experiences, simply because, like you, I recognized what it was and I went and got mental health care for it. And every so often now, I still check in with a counselor or therapist, just like a tune up. But because I have those coping skills and those coping strategies, now I'm taking that and I'm trying to assist my students and say, stop beating yourself up. No one else is. Stop being your own worst enemy. Stop being your biggest critic. That sometimes you need to fail forward before you can move on, so you can regroup. Because sometimes you have to pivot because, like you said, when you come from a structured environment, whether you had a strong school environment that was supportive or a household environment, you're told almost this formula of what you need to do to be able to be successful. And I think what's happening in today's society is that formula is obsolete. It's no longer working. So now I think we need to abandon these formulas of this quote unquote American dream for success, and now start expanding our options and allowing people to understand that failure is a part of it. It's not going to always add up for you. And sometimes you have to take that part of the journey and hit that brick wall to know that maybe I need to pivot and go a different direction, that maybe this is not it for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've always worked in the space of retention and matriculation, and I love that space when everybody's like, I don't want to work with those group of students. I love it because I get to hear more stories, and that's what I tell my students. Tell me what happened and be raw with be completely 100 with me. And just to see the amount of pressure, especially with black women, young black women, the amount of pressure, they come in here and they just look like, well, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that one thing is like, it's okay not to be okay, right? This office is your safe place, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not even 20 seconds before they are just busting out in tears because we haven't been taught to know that it's okay not to be okay. We've always had to be everything that everybody needs us to be, except for who we need to be for ourselves. And so I really appreciate you sharing those stories because when they hear more stories, when they have administrators and people in leadership position like how we are, um, they can know that it's okay and I'm going to be good. And so I really appreciate with you sharing that space because that's what makes people successful. That's what makes our community grow. When we get away from the make it till you fake it till you make it and all this kind of stuff. You faking basically means you just internalizing what you really feel until
Mm-hmm.
you get to where you need to be, and your journey is even longer because you never get to identify that problem that is really hindering you from moving forward, whether it's insecurity or it's just depression or just like you said, constantly beating ourselves up. And so what are some things that you had to do back then besides relying on our parents? Because even so, I know for me, I was, even though my parents loved me, I was still very prideful of like, you don't want your parents to know
Mm-hmm.
that you're not okay. You don't want your parents to know that, yeah, I didn't get that job, but I'm good. You have to get to the point where you're like, no, I'm not good. I'm tired of going these, not getting interviews. So just kind of talk about that, how you felt in that. Like, did you ever feel like you had to, do this whole fake it till you make it thing, or how was that journey for you, communicating with your family and your support system?
It took a little bit before I could say anything to them, but I think it's because of the dynamic of, if you feel as though you're afraid of how your parents are going to react, you're hesitant to say anything. And a lot of times I did just carry it on because I didn't feel, it wasn't that my parents were going to love me any less. I didn't think any of that. I just felt as though they've raised me to be strong enough to withstand this and make it through. So I don't have to ask for help. And now it's at the point where my family's upset if I don't ask for help. It's the opposite. So that's how it was in the beginning. And but I felt as though, but if I can just get by myself and have my breakdown, if I can get by myself and let it out, then I can put myself back together and keep going. And that's how it was happening in the beginning. However, I realized in retrospect that that was actually more painful than just coming outright and saying, I don't have it all together. I don't know what to do. I feel as though I'm carrying too much. I feel as though it's too much pressure. I don't know what's going to happen if I'm not successful. I don't know what I'm going to do. Instead of just saying that in the beginning, because I was so fearful that I wasn't going to get the support, I wound up putting myself through more pain of trying to carry the load. So now today I tell a lot of Black women that I run into that may be in some type of student role. If we're just having a conversation and they feel comfortable enough talking to me about their plans, and like you said, that you just ask them say one thing and they just the shield and the mask comes off because we're good at math. I'll say one thing to them and just listen, and they start talking about what they want to do. And then the next thing that comes out of their mouth is, um, but I don't think it's gonna work because, and then they spend more time talking about why it won't work. And so I said, why are you putting obstacles in front of you that don't exist? Sometimes we need to put stuff down because we have no business picking it up. I had one student talk about how she didn't think she would get into a specific program because I couldn't see this and I couldn't read this. So they're probably not going to pick it. I don't think they are because I didn't see it. I said, well, did you ask them? No, I just assumed they weren't going to do it. I said, why are you putting obstacles in front of you? Stop putting obstacles in front of you. Wait and let someone tell you no instead of telling yourself no first. And I think that I dealt with a lot of that. Talking to them allows me to reflect more on myself. So I realized I think I had been guilty of that. That's why I could identify it. I was sitting there putting obstacles in front of myself about why it wouldn't work because I was so comfortable taking what I thought was the safe road to success that I thought that any little inkling of stepping out on faith, I was going to fall.
Yeah, I just look all the way back to how you went from starting at Prairie View, went to the PWI, work related, went back to Prairie View eventually. It takes me back to a story of one guy that he was in an undergraduate program. I was working on my master's, and he had a very adamant dislike for the white community, and he was vocal about it. And he was there at a PWI, but he was vocal about it. And I had to tell him it was my very last class during my math. Um, we had undergraduate and graduate students together. It was a grant writing class, and we were walking back to our vehicles at the end of the day, and it was him, myself, and another guy who was a mentee of mine. And I remember he made some statement. I said, "Man, you know what? You got to realize while you're here, they have to teach you. These who you don't like, they have to give certain information, resources, et cetera,
Mhm.
to you. Take full advantage of it while you're here, and then whenever you leave here, take it back to your community.
Mhm.
So we have to sometimes go to a table that's already been built for generations and take a couple of screws, take a couple of pieces of wood, and then go build your own table.
Mhm.
But until you know how a table is built, until you know how to keep a table together, you got to get it where you can. So I love the fact that you were able to make that transition and get back to where it is that you really wanted to pour your time and efforts into. I could have stayed down in Miami. 2012, after I graduated with my bachelor's, I went down to Miami to live. Had no intentions of coming back to Mississippi, like none whatsoever. But when I was working there, I started to see these teenagers that looked like me, age out of the child welfare system, falling through the same cracks that I saw my peers falling through when I was living here in Mississippi. So I told myself, you know what? I came down here to Miami. I've really enhanced myself as a professional. I could go for my master's here and pour back into the community down here, but no, let me go back home. Let me pour back home. So I came back to get my master's degree, and eventually went to LSU to work on my doctorate. But now in the position of excuse me, transferring to Jackson State, which
Mhm.
I look to finish my doctorate there, but also they want me to work with them. So
Mhm.
so similar field sort of. I never went to a PW, or I never went to a HBCU as a student, because from where I'm from, we're just not told about it, and you don't learn about it
Mhm.
until you're already in college.
Mhm.
But I just love the fact that you were able to make that transition back. What are some of the things that you've been able to pour into your students that you feel you wouldn't have been able to, or maybe you wouldn't have been able to at a certain capacity had you not had that PWI experience?
A lot of what I'm pouring into them are some of the professional skills that they may not have been exposed to prior to meeting me or prior to being at an HBCU, because they may not have been invited to the table, like you say. There's some things I did not learn, and it's at no fault of my professors, by the way, but there were a lot of things I didn't know about navigating the professional world, all the way down to interpersonal communication skills, how to say something, or how to send the email or the memo, or how to protect yourself professionally, or how to have a work life balance until um, I was in the workforce. So a lot of things I had to learn by trial and error, because no matter how much your predecessors may try to educate you and tell you about, meaning professional Black Americans that may have been in the workforce a generation ahead of you, two generations ahead. They can tell you so much, but some things you're not going to learn in the current workforce until you're in it. And because there were some other things that I had to understand and navigate. And a lot of it was tied to technology, but a lot of it I had to learn just trial and error. So when I go into that classroom and I talk to the students, or even I see them in the hallway, or I see them in some type of program or event and we're just talking, there are a lot of things they don't know, only because in the Black community there's still some things we just don't talk about. Some of it is just cultural. I don't think it's because we're super ignorant people. I think it's just that it's some things that they just hadn't had the opportunity to be exposed to, so I could be the first person they meet. So I'm teaching them the little minute things we don't think about, such as you send a follow-up email after an interview, how to send an email, how to address people. There's little minute things that we teach on the HBCU campus that I did not have to concern myself with when I was teaching at a PWI, such as how to address a professor. Some of them don't meet an African American with a terminal degree, with a doctorate, until they get to us. So learning how to address us, how to write the emails, how to the different types of discourse with how you speak with your friends, it may not be in the same sense as how you speak with me, even though we're skin folk. It's just different. It's little things like that. Sometimes I can close the door and I can have a raw discussion with them about, okay, this is what you're supposed to know. This is what you're supposed to do according to the textbook, content of course. But let me also tell you, this is how it looks when we go into the workplace. This is how you navigate it. How are you going to handle this encounter? If your supervisor comes to you about this, which is something that may be very distinct to our culture, it could be a tone of voice, the words we use. And I say, what if they come to you about that? How are you going to respond to your supervisor when they question you about that, knowing that your tone of voice to us culturally is acceptable, but they say it sounds abrasive? Your words don't sound right. How are you going to handle that? How are we going to respond to that? Those are conversations I didn't have to have at a PWI. There was a level of privilege there with those students, so they didn't have to worry about that. But our students have to be concerned, and they don't know until we bring it to their attention. So I'm putting them on alert and telling them, still be yourself, but also be armored with how to handle that type of situation if it occurs. So those are a lot of the things that I'm talking to them about, that, and I enjoy it, that I could not talk about or did not have to talk about when I was in another institution.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because being in the social work profession, we don't tiptoe around any type of taboo topics. So we bring it to the forefront, and it caused lots of heated debates in the classroom from students that are not from the area. So you living in South Mississippi, we've been dealing with racial relations
Mm-hmm.
forever. So we got
Mm-hmm.
people who are from other parts of the nation or other parts of the world, and they come in here and like, what's the big deal about this flag? What's the big deal? If you only knew. And like you said, oftentimes, regardless on which end of the spectrum, sometimes purely ignorance. They just don't know. They were never exposed to it. So if you have the people who are from the Black community that are very, aggressive advocates in a very liberal fashion when it comes to the social work, pro social justice, so on and so forth. But they don't know some of the things that we have to take accountability for within the community. Also, they need some education. But when it comes to the other side of the coin, you have no idea what we deal with. You have no idea what it feels like to go into a grocery store and every time every time you look, that same person is following you around.
Mm-hmm.
And just the whole notion, and we mentioned this on probably about 2 years ago now. We mentioned this on the show, the whole notion of white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when your history is part of the core curriculum, but our history is an elective, like that should tell you right there. There's things that you have just blatant privilege to that, as they said on what is Scandal, we have to work twice as hard as you to get half of what you
That's
get.
just what.
But it
Mm-hmm.
takes that education. We have to continue to pour into that next generation and help them realize, like, just because your mom and dad said when you were coming up, we can't have this, we can't have that. We don't live in that type of community, don't drive that type of car. Don't internalize that because that's only what they experience. So they're only passing down what they know to pass down. So go and experience more. And the fact that you were able to experience more in these different settings, you can pour more into that next
Mm-hmm.
generation. I think that's so incredibly important.
Absolutely. And I would say that, you don't know until you see something different. We have to go, like when I started teaching, going into these different, I've taught in, predominantly white schools, I've taught in Hispanic schools, I've taught in, your predominantly African American schools. And I'm like, that's when you start seeing like, well, dang, they talking about career day starting in middle school at one school, and we just trying to get them to sit down over here,
Mm-hmm.
So um, I always said, I was like, how do we make sense of where we're at? And so what I realized as I started going on this journey of education into leadership was that I am the example. So every time you see me, you're going to see me in a light of where you can possibly be. And so my students would say, like, why you're a coach and you're always dressed up, or you work in athletics, why are you always dressed up? Because I'm in a working environment. And when you're in a working environment, you wear work clothes. And when you're in an athletic, event, you wear athletic clothes. And so things that we assume they should know, we can't assume they know because they haven't been there. We had a what do you call it, a complication not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And we had students that the president's talking and they're up there taking a selfie,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing all this stuff. Well, but they don't know. So, I mean, you would hope that they would know, like, hey, your resident of your school is talking. You probably shouldn't go walking up the aisle and taking pictures. But, there's just some things that we have to address. Even so, more what I see now with our Black women is how they dress. I'm like, hey, dress how you want to be addressed. You have everything hanging out. You have if you're a business major and I had $1 million that I want to invest in you, but you got the best business. But when I look at you, I don't see a businesswoman. you know, and so I had to, and some, you do get that pushback because it's like, oh my God, I'm in college and she's trying to tell me how to dress. So how was those conversations with you or your experience with those students when it's like, hey, I want you to know that this is out of love, but we can't fix what we don't acknowledge and what we don't speak truth to. The truth is you can't dress like that. The truth is
Yeah, that's the truth.
that.
There's
Like
no other way to say it.
bonnet, the bonnet got to come off at 10. Okay. After
Mhm.
10 a.m., no bonnets. Okay. Not hanging
Yeah.
anymore. You're outside. This is not an outside gear. And so we have to teach those conversations. We have to have those conversations. And I love having them because when they can see the example in front of them, it's different than someone telling them what they should do and they don't see it. And so that's why it's important for people who are in leadership that we present ourselves in a way that they can see themselves. Hey, I can do some things too. I got tennis shoes in my trunk. I can go play basketball with you, but for right now, this is what we're doing in this space. So speak on some of that experience that you've had where um, even at a PWI where were you ever feeling like you had to, you living in your truth that you have to teach these small selective students that you may have at these PWIs, and you want to stick to the system, but you also like, this is my opportunity to tell the student, like, what you're doing is not going to help you. So how were you able to stick with the truth, your truth, but
Mhm.
also be a part of a system that may not always be built or in our favor to being successful?
I think that when I was at the PWI had already psychologically prepared myself to go in there, just teach the content, and just go home. I didn't actually find myself conscious of how I was doing it, what I was doing, or paying closer attention to the students as far as background until I had that one Black student in my class or two. I never had more than one or two the few years I was there, which was ironic. But when they got there, and they were always female, they would walk in and their reaction to seeing me as the professor was priceless. I wish I had recorded it when they walked through the door because their eyes just lit up, their faces lit up. They were excited. And a couple of them even told me, I am so glad you are the professor. And they actually gassed me up to really live more in my truth and say, okay, well then I didn't know my value until they I knew my value, but not to the extent in that space until they said it. So then when I went into class, I it really gave me the energy to really be more motivated to teach, to do more than just talk about what's in a textbook. Now let's talk more about what it looks like and to really engage them more with a conversation because I then started wanting to give platforms to these young women that look like me to be able to speak their truth. So if I opened a discussion about how something should be in their profession, and everybody got the chance to speak, they felt comfortable enough to say what they really felt because the person that was facilitating the discussion and running it looked like them. They felt that support. And that's how I really was able to help them at that PWI, at the PWIs, because in turn it helped me. It became reciprocal. I didn't realize that. When I went to an HBCU, ironically, I didn't worry about giving everyone a platform according to race. I now give more of a platform according to gender because I'm in a field that right now educator preparation is female dominated. But I have the luxury of having males, here and there. And now when I do that, when they walk through the door, of course, they expect to see me. But because I had that experience at the PWI according to race and making sure everybody had a platform, now when I walk into my classes now, I make sure everyone, regardless of their gender or regardless of their religious affiliation, whatever it may be, has that platform to feel comfortable. So they feel as though a piece of themselves is being added into the classroom experience. So even when, because a lot of times when you really get to going with your students and they're majority female, they get real comfortable real fast. And I don't blame them. And I do too. But I try to steer them from thinking one way, just like I did my students at the PWI. And I try to make sure that if they're not Black and they're not female, they get a voice so that everybody gets some level of education and something to take away from whatever's going on in the class.
Oh, that Brian was saying something. He must be muted.
Yeah, I tried to unmute myself. Yeah, I sit here and because I am my ex-wife. I got a divorce officially last year. Was with my kid's mom for going on 14, almost 14 years. We were married for almost 10. She's actually Bolivian, South America. So being with her and around her culture for so long made me very, very multicultural. I even worked in the international studies office throughout my undergraduate time. So I met and made very close friends with people from all over the world, tons of different nationalities, ethnicities. So it positioned me to be a lot more empathetic across the board and not just, pull out the dagger right when I hear someone say something out of left field and understand that, maybe their experience put them in a position to look at it the way that they're looking at it. So thankfully, I was going through my psychology degree at the same time, so I understood human behavior and how to approach people whenever there is potential conflict brewing. And it caused me to be able to do that same thing to give everybody a voice and not allow one person to feel isolated simply because they are ignorant to the fact of what's going on in front of them. So I think that's super important, especially in the academic setting, because not only can it teach that student that you're working with that there's a different perspective, but it can also teach those who may not agree with them, what? I can't just jump on everybody simply because of their first response. I need to figure out, okay, where did that come from? Why do you think that way? Have you experienced anything different? Have you been around people that experience anything different? And it can really help people feel empowered to go out and spread that type of reaction instead of automatically shutting people off whenever they hear something that they don't like. And I know Dr. Hobson can likely relate, but she works with a couple different communities there, or she has worked with a couple different ethnic communities there in Texas. And there's lots of things that the Hispanic cultures experience, do, and say that are completely offensive to some in our community, and vice versa. I'll give you one example. Whenever I first started dating my ex-wife, her dad called her gordita, and I knew that meant little fat girl. So I'm like, what? Why would he say something like that to you? But it's a term of endearment to them. So just being able to understand and not put yourself into a position to where you're known as, or you're put into a box as, oh, he is abrasive, he is aggressive. Be careful about what you say around him. So now people aren't being their genuine self around you. So you're only getting a shell of what people are. So I just love the fact that you mentioned that, because you have to educate people across the board. And actually, I have to pull up the flyer, but I remember when we were putting together some of the wording for the Black podcast, this is not just for a Black audience. This is for
Mm-hmm.
people across the spectrum to understand the Black
Mm-hmm.
community better. So just wanted to throw you kudos on that one.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. And we started to bring people on the show to, share those stories, because we don't share our story enough. And so you can't blame other people for not knowing about our journeys, because we don't talk about it. And the only journeys that they know are the ones that they see on TV. And those are the ones that is like, oh, wow, such and such was sleeping underneath the bridge, or such and such grew up with no food. And so that's what they know. And we have to teach them something different by, hey, we all, like you said in the beginning, have not grown up like that. My mother didn't go to college. My dad went to the military. And so then when I started going on my college journey, my dad went back to school.
Mm.
And so but he was very successful in what he did. He was in the army. He was retired after 27 years. But that was something that I challenged him and motivated him to do. And so we turned it into a competition when we decided to go to a master's program. And so it was like, why don't we do the master's program together? And so he was like, okay. And so we laugh to this day, because he always says, you actually have two master's degrees, because I would be doing mine and then be like, Dad, did you turn your paper in? He'd be like, well, I started it. Go ahead and top it off if you can. It's like, are you serious? And so we used to be laughing about that. But even though my mother didn't go to college, that was a non-negotiable. It was like, you going to school. And when you go, you're going to pass and you're going to get these degrees. And so we all don't have to have these certain stories. But my mom was very successful at what she did. And so I was still able to get skills and training from watching her journey. How to be a supportive wife, how to, when it was time to go, we all went. It was no like your dad's going here and we gonna stay here. It was like, hey, we gotta go, we gotta adjust, time to adjust. And that was the great thing about being a military brat, was that I had to adjust. I had to go to Hawaii and live there for 3 years and learn how to deal with Samoans, and then I had to go and learn how the culture in Germany, because that's what you had to do. You had to adapt wherever you went. So I want you to speak on just where you're currently at right now, what you're doing, and in this space that you're in, how are you able to continue to grow? What are some of the things that you're doing in that? And then what are you doing for you to make sure that what you're teaching and how you're living stays relevant?
Okay, that's a lot. Let me see where to start. Okay, also like how you said that it wasn't just like your dad said, it wasn't just one person's degree, it's everybody's degree. I have to say that as well, that I tell my students that, that's your family's degree, right? You're going to have to get that to your mama when you finish, right? And they're like, yeah, and I went through the same thing. This is my parents' doctorate. It's not just mine. It's ours, and it's always evident. So, in this day and time, what I'm doing to try to continue to grow and continue to help others is I'm trying to be of service. I think more so now in this season, because I feel as though I'm back to where I was, where I did still set some goals, some realistic ones. I have met them. And so I said, okay, well, I'm in a season of service now. How can I be of service to my culture, to my community, to others? So to be able, first thing I had to do was help myself. I had to figure out, what did I like, what did I prefer, what's my motivation, what are my strengths, and what are my areas where I'm not so strong. I don't want to call them weaknesses. I just want to call them areas where I'm not that strong. I tell people that's not my ministry, and I'm not afraid to admit that. And the first thing I think about is, I am fortunate to be in a very small percentage of Black women that have a degree this high. It is anywhere from 2 to 3%. So I said, first of all, that puts me in a space of privilege that others may not have. So because I have that, and I'm reminded regularly about how great it is that I have this degree,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looked upon with pride, which I know you probably are as well. So you think about, okay, what motivated me to even get the degree? And my motivation was I need to be a voice in education for not only Black students, but any student that's underrepresented, as well as my brothers and sisters in the profession that aren't being celebrated or aren't being given a voice. So, what I'm doing is engaging in research because that seems to be the way that I've been able to get my voice out to a wider group of people is through publishing and research, publications and research, writing, because there's only so many places I can go. But if I write it, it gets to the masses. So right now, I'm engaging in a research project that really takes me back to what made me even enter the program, which was giving the voice. And I have this very, very deep interest in culture, culture relevance, and how culture is really at the center of education. It's like this big elephant in the room
Mm-hmm.
that everybody doesn't want to talk about yet. It, it,
Mm-hmm.
it
We're not.
doesn't want to be acknowledged. Let me say that by everyone. And by everyone, I mean the people that it won't benefit the most. And I'm looking at the existence of it in educator preparation in the school systems. But I'm not asking everybody if it exists. I'm only asking African American educators. So I developed a survey instrument that I started sending out in March, and I still have out there for African American educators in any capacity in the public school system, K-12. And I want to know from them, is culture relevance being practiced on your campus, in your school system? Is it being acknowledged at all? And if so, are you all doing anything in your educational practices that's being promoted by your district or your school that will promote culture being centered in your everyday instruction? And I've gotten some feedback, and I'm not going to talk too much about what it is because that's still open. I don't want to sway or convince anybody to answer a certain way, but I did receive feedback from Black administrators, as well as Black counselors, as well as classroom teachers that identify as African American. And their feedback, it's a little, the discrepancies are there as far as how it's perceived. And that was my original reason for going into education. A doctorate in education was to try to give us a voice. So I'm going to start really putting the results of that data out. Also, what I've discussed or published before at conferences, in journals, even in a book, was about the impact of culture relevant practices or culture relevant teaching, centering culture in teaching for African American males. But I'm talking about them in the early years, early literacy, early development, when the academic performance gaps begin, so that we can try to curve it, so that people understand what motivates some of our African American males when they're young to even stay engaged, so that it'll have an impact later on to try to reduce some of the numbers of those that are being identified as special needs when they could have been avoided, those being identified as behavior problems when it could have been avoided, also avoiding the outcome of these young men having a bumpy road before they get their diploma, so that they don't have a journey that we've heard before of, I was kicked out of class, I was suspended a lot, I was fighting in school, My teacher didn't like me. If we can avoid some of that by keeping them engaged early, then that's something I also want to continue to focus on as well.
Wow. And thank you for saying, some of the things that you have made reference to, always growing up, checking this box and hitting
Mhm.
these degrees and accomplishments. And one thing that I also still see my counselor to this day, I started out seeing her when my brother passed, so as a grieving counselor. And then I realized that she's like my person. I told her she's because I personal train as well. But I said, you're my personal trainer for my mental, you know, and it just really helped to have someone tell you. I think one of the things that she said to me that just blew my mind, she said, you can't base your happiness off of um, accomplishments, based on accomplishments. She's like, you've checked all these boxes and you haven't really enjoyed them and been very present because you're looking for the next move. And there is no next move. So it was really confirmation for me to hear you say, um, I've accomplished these things. Now it's time to serve. You've checked these boxes, so it's time to serve. And so I was always serving and accomplishing at the same time. So now I have an opportunity. So thank you for, saying that you've accomplished these things. You've checked these boxes. There's no more boxes. Now the box you need to check is continuing to serve and spend your energy and your efforts that you did into getting those degrees. Because like you said, they're not for us, it's for them. I would tell my athletes that all the time. Who said you can't be an athlete to have a doctorate degree? Who said
Mhm.
that? Who said you had to be the dumb job? Who said that? Who said you can't utilize your skills to get you an education? Who said that? And so, we have to continue to be that example. And so I appreciate that you staying relevant by continuing to serve and sharing your experiences and your success with those who may not, number one, have the strength to do it on their own, or who may not think that they can do it on their own. And for those who uh are doing it and know that, okay, there's going to be trials and tribulations, but I'm gonna be okay. And it's through leaders like yourself, um, that we need more of. We have to build other leaders around us, because the more that we can bring up, the more they can bring up, and it's just going to continue to grow as a community. So thank you for just staying relevant, and making sure that you're good so that you can be good and give people and create that capacity for others to be successful. So I really appreciate you doing that, sis. You're doing a phenomenal job, and I just thank you for um, your love and your passion behind what you do, because we find a lot in education. People just checking a box. Oh, going on year number 23. Oh, going on year number 24. And I just remember being in these faculty meetings on, K through 12. And I'm like, I am not about to sit here for 20 years and just be doing the same old thing. I need to be making sure that I'm growing so that I can help others grow around me. So thank you for continuing to move up that chain and helping, our community and sharing your story, because we don't get to hear about our stories enough. And so I really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you for having me.
Brian, can you hear us? Oh, it
Yeah,
sounds like it's okay.
Okay.
yeah, I'm just every show that we have, I always aim to just take a few things from our guests that I can take out and just continue to apply and push forward. So just thinking back on some of the relatabilities, some of the things that you've gone through that I can somewhat relate to. It's just like a reiteration on some of the things that I'm doing currently, that you're going in the right direction. Like, you're going in the right direction. And so many people second guess themselves because they don't see anybody else doing it, or they don't think anybody else had these same trials, tribulations, so on and so forth. So I just want to thank you for just being as transparent and open as possible about things that you've gone through, the things that brought you to where you are today, because I'm going to be able to continue to support the individuals and use you as an example. You see where she is? You see where she is? There's nothing different between her and you than dedication, hard work, self-discipline, and just persisting and knowing where you want to go. So just thank you again for everything that you've been able to share with us. Um, you don't have any type of or any publications that are coming out or recently came out that you think be something to shout out, do you?
Um, I have one that has been submitted, but I don't want to talk about it and jinx it. So, but I do want to say that part of my growth is I actually started a consulting firm, educational consulting, with
Nice.
with culture being at the center, culture relevance. So, and it's called KLT Consulting. People can reach me through the website klteducates.com, and I work on assisting educators of any level with understanding how to bridge the gap with students that are culturally diverse, linguistically diverse. I even come in and help with certification preparation for teacher certification. I also assist with program evaluation. So if they have initiatives and programs up and running and they need an outside person to evaluate it and give them some objective feedback, I'm doing all of that to try to expand my mentorship and coaching, because I found that that apparently has become one of my lanes. So I'm going to try to thrive in it. So I do have a publication that's under review, but right now I'm focusing more on serving, consulting, mentoring, coaching, being on boards, more community oriented projects.
Got it. Okay, okay. I
That
like
is
that.
amazing. You try to downplay a little bit. Oh, I got a couple little things, but I'm sure when we get on here, we're gonna be like, she got more than a couple little things on there. She has a whole book. So, but thank you for just being, so humble and continuing to serve. And we really appreciate you taking the time to be on the Black Podcast. And we'll make sure that we're all family. We'll be reconnecting with you very soon and seeing how we can continue to um, create this change in the masses. And so we do that by collaborating, partnerships,
Yes,
bouncing ideas off of each other. And how can we take what you're doing, your gift, with our gift and what we're doing, and make something that is, or create something that is going to create more change. And that's ultimately what we're here to do. We all have one thing in common, and that is change, that is love, that is passion. Those are things that we will always find a safe place for all of us. And so I thank you for creating that space and allowing us into your life and what you're doing. Um, we're family, so we're going to stay connected. And this is about building a relationship. This is more than just being a guest on the show. So we thank you
absolutely.
for that.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. I had fun.
I see. I told you. That's what we do here at the Black Podcast. We have fun. We tell stories. We cry. We laugh. And but at the end, we all leave thinking, "Wow, that was time well spent." And so, thank you for just being you. And we're going to put you in the backstage. And again, just stay in contact with us.
All right, I sure will. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
But we're going to close out. We have such a great guest, I mean, she's loud. She's amazing just to hear her story and the things that she's accomplished and how she continues to serve, not just checking the box, but continuing to say, now it's time to serve. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Make sure y'all go out and look at the publications that she does have and support, support, support. And I can guarantee that you will see more collaborations and partnerships in the near future with this young lady. We look forward to working with Dr. Thomas later on and seeing how we can continue to create change. And you can help create that change by visiting us on wearehsba.com and seeing how you can contribute to the change and what can you do to support what we're doing, whether it's monetary gifts, whether it's volunteering, whether it's sharing your ideas, whatever it is. Everyone is relevant. Everyone has a gift that we all need to help contribute to.
Yes, indeed. Thank you guys for tuning in again. Anyone looking for these consulting services of Dr. Clean, don't hesitate to reach out. We dropped her website here in the graphics area, but we can also share that in our comments after the show. But definitely don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be back here another week, same time, doing the same thing with another great guest. Thank you guys again, and we'll see you on the flip side.